used to work the night shift at a mid-sized hotel, one of those chain places in the suburbs where everything's a little too clean and a little too quiet. You probably know the type. Off a main road, just far enough from the city to attract people who didn't want to pay downtown prices. The kind of place where nothing really happens, until it does. And guess who gets a front row seat? Whichever poor employee was on shift that night. I guess if I'm being completely honest, it really wasn't a bad gig, but wasn't the best either. Most nights it was dead quiet. Just me, a cup of coffee, and a flickering monitor watching a couple of empty hallways. The occasional guest would stumble in late, or I'd deal with a lost tourist, but for the most part it was uneventful. The hardest part was staying awake, especially after midnight when time seemed to stretch out forever. There's paperwork and all kinds of clerical upkeep in the back, and of course, folding things. There was almost always something to help the time go by. I've been working there for almost 2 years at this point, and I'd seen my fair share of weirdos. There was always this guy who parked by the dumpster and just lingered long enough to make you wonder if he lived in his car, or came by day because we had a nice dark parking lot that he could get high in. Sometimes the occasional crackhead who'd somehow scrape together just enough cash to rent a room for the night, then refuse to leave the next morning. Domestic disputes were another common occurrence. Raised voices, slamming doors, the uncomfortable task of calling the police, and try not to think about what was really going on behind those closed doors. But most of that was manageable. It's part of the job. You deal with it, you make a note, and you move on. Don't let it stick and let it slide off your back, as my old man would say. Then came the night that I met the man who asked specifically for room 401A. It was a Wednesday night, middle of the week. Things were slower than ever. I was on the overnight shift, starting at 11 p.m. and running through to 7 a.m. The lobby was quiet. Only sounds were the faint hum of the AC, a soft clink of the coffee pot refilling itself for the third time that night. I'd say around midnight, the front door slid open, and a man walked right in. At first glance, there was nothing really remarkable about him. He had that typical business travel wear, mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a dark jacket and an over-the-button shirt. A little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. He approached the desk, his steps pretty light and his expression calm. Didn't do anything to land on my radar. "Good evening, sir," I said, my voice breaking the silence. "You need a room for the night?" He nodded, his eyes scanning the lobby as if he was looking for something or somebody else. "Yeah," he said, his voice even. "I need a room, but not just any room. I want one in particular." I raised an eyebrow. Most people just wanted a room, any room. I've never had somebody request a specific one before. Okay, sure, which one?" "Room 401A, he said casually. I froze for a second, processing what he just asked me. The thing is, we didn't have any rooms labeled with letters. None of them. Our rooms were numbered by floor and unit count. First floor, rooms 100 to 113. Second floor, 214 to 227, and so on. Room 401A, that didn't exist. I thought maybe I misheard him, asked him to repeat it, and he said the same thing. 401A. When he said it this time, he was staring right through me, giving me this sly grin. I chuckled awkwardly, thinking he was making some kind of joke. "Think you might have the wrong hotel. We don't have a room 401A. Maybe you mean room 440? The man's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed amused now, like I was the one making a mistake. No, I'm sure it's room 401A. I blinked, trying to figure out how to explain it. "Sir, there is no room 401A. We don't have rooms with letters here. You can get a room on the 4th floor if that's what you're looking for, but..." His demeanor shifted instantly. His calm, mild energy evaporated, replaced by something darker and much more aggressive. He stepped closer to the desk now, his eyes narrowing. I asked for room 401A. Are you telling me you don't have it? I took an involuntary step back, my heart racing. This wasn't just a guy who got the wrong place. He was serious, dead serious. And his frustration seemed to be growing by the second. Suddenly, it then occurred to me he could have a knife or a gun. Look, sir, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what to tell you. We don't have a room 401A. It's literally not in our system. Look, maybe you got the wrong hotel, or maybe there's been some other kind of mistake. I can get you a different room easily. How about room 440? It's available and it's on the 4th floor. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and calculating. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he was committing every detail in my face into his memory. Then he slowly leaned in, lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. Lying, he hissed. I know that room is ready, and you're gonna regret keeping it from me. Before I could respond, he stepped back and straightened his jacket, walked out of the lobby. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, leaving me standing there shaken and confused. I spent the rest of my shift on edge, jumping at every noise I heard. I kept expecting him to come back and start yelling or worse, but he never did. That night passed without incident, and by the time my shift ended, I almost convinced myself it was just some weird misunderstanding. Maybe that guy was just crazy, or maybe he was playing some kind of prank that I didn't understand. But that wouldn't be much of a story, would it? Because it didn't end there. Exactly 1 week passed, and the memory of that strange encounter slowly began to fade. Sure, I kept my eyes peeled during my shifts, half expecting that same man to show up again. But nothing out of the ordinary happened again. The hotel had its usual flow of late-night guests, some weirder than others, but nobody came looking for a room that didn't exist. By the time that next Wednesday had rolled around, I almost had written that whole thing off. People like him do show up sometimes. I've had my share of crazy customers over the years, paranoid guests who thought the government was watching them, couples who got into fights and tried to drag me inside their drama. This guy was really no different, just another nutcase who probably confused us with another hotel. That night I clocked in for my shift at the usual time, 11 p.m. sharp. My coworker Jason was finishing up his shift. It looked like he had a long day. He gave me a tired nod as I walked in. Quiet night? I asked, hoping for a smooth, uneventful shift. Mostly, Jason said, stretching his arms with a yawn. But some weird guy came by earlier, dropped off a key card. I frowned. Key card? Yeah, he said it wasn't for this hotel, but figured we'd want it back. Thing is, it's one of ours, just an old one. It looked like it'd been through hell. Now I was interested. We changed our key cards a few years ago, but a few older ones were probably still floating around. It wasn't unusual for people to hold on to them after checkout, but most of the time, they were useless after being deactivated. Jason handed me the key card. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the number that was printed on it. Room 401A. My mouth fell open. I must have stared at that card for a whole 60 seconds, mind racing to make sense of it. Are you sure this is ours? Jason shrugged. It does look like one of the old ones. You'd know better than me. You've been here longer. The plastic was worn and scratched like it had been through years and years of use, but there it was, clear as day. Room 401A. It made no sense. That room did not exist. I knew that, and so did Jason, but here's this key card, staring back at me like some kind of sick joke. I'll look into it, I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Probably just some kind of mix-up. Jason didn't seem too concerned. He gave me a half-hearted wave and headed for the door, probably eager to get home and forget about the weirdness of his shift. As soon as he left, I slid back into my chair behind the desk, that key card still in my hand. My fingers brushed over the numbers again, as if touching it would somehow change what was printed on there. It didn't. There was suddenly a deep desire inside me to try that key card on every door in the building, just to see which unit used to be the infamous 401A. I glanced up at the clock, 11:30 p.m. The night stretched out before me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be here. I spent the next hour nervously flipping through the channels on the TV behind my desk, trying to distract myself, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every single creak of the building, every faint noise from the hallway, it set me on edge. I kept glancing back and forth at the security monitors, half expecting to see that man, the one who'd asked for room 401A, staring back at me from one of those empty hallways. But the halls were deserted. No guests, no staff, just a flickering image of the empty fourth floor on one of the screens. But that's when I heard it. At first it was just this light tapping, faint and irregular, like somebody was knocking on a door from far away. I ignored it, thinking it was probably the ice machine acting up, or maybe a guest closing their door too hard. But that sound did not stop. It grew louder and more incessant, like it was moving closer to me. I sat up listening. The tapping was coming from behind a wall. My wall. The office was in the back of the hotel, nowhere near the guest room, so there's no reason anybody should be knocking on the other side. I stood up quickly, heart pounding, walked to the far end of the office where the sound was the loudest. It was slow and methodical, almost like somebody was tapping out a message. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out what it could be, and the noise stopped. I froze, waiting. Breath caught in my throat as a second stretched out before me, the silence becoming unbearable. The phone rang. I jumped and nearly knocked the chair over as I rushed to grab the receiver. Front desk, I said, voice a little shaky. For a moment there was nothing, just silence on the other end, and then breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Like somebody was standing just inches away from the phone, listening. Hello? I said again. Anybody there? That same breathing continued for a few more seconds before the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing, and checked the caller ID on the phone's display. No number, just a string of zeros, the kind you see when somebody's calling from inside the hotel. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring again, but the room was silent. Too silent. That tapping had stopped, the eerie breathing now gone. I glanced at the security monitors. Still nothing. The fourth floor was empty, halls still eerily quiet. I tried to convince myself, okay, it's just a prank. There's a guest messing with me. Or maybe the guy from last week was playing some long game to freak me out. But there was something in the pit of my stomach that told me this was different. This wasn't just some drunk guest or a faulty phone line. I spent the next few hours in a state of heightened alert, checking the security footage every few seconds, pacing the office, listening for any other strange sounds. Every now and again, I thought I'd hear faint noises, footsteps in the distance, the sound of a door closing, but nobody or anything ever appeared on the monitors. Then around 3 a.m., the phone rang again. I picked it up cautiously, half expecting the same breathing that I heard from before. But this time, there was a voice, barely even above a whisper, but I could hear it clearly. Room 401A, the voice said. It's waiting for you. Then the line went dead. I stood there, receiver still in hand, mind now racing. The voice on the phone had been so calm, so matter-of-fact. But it wasn't just the words that chilled me, it was the tone. It sounded like somebody who knew something that I didn't, like they were in on a secret that I was about to uncover, whether I wanted to or not. That was enough for me. I holed myself up in the main office and just waited for dawn. No one came in, and I didn't make any effort to get anything else done. When the sun came up, I left a note with my notice on it and left the second my relief got there. No job out there is worth that kind of headache. And I never saw that asshole again. Never got any more weird calls. But for one night, I would have told you that I believe in ghosts. When I told this story to some friends a few months later, they had a theory that pretty much fit the bill. They thought maybe 401A could be code for something. Perhaps that guy wasn't trying to buy a room, but something else altogether. Either way, I don't want to know what that was.
I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break. My parents' anniversary happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north and were staying in a hotel. Having the house to myself for once, I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers up pretty loud, and were gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down, he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house. By the kitchen, we had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and at first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard. But then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good. Again, we were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes, we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason, I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up, over and over. I don't know why, possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up, feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty, and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring down the hall. Whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police. and while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house, looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone, at least as far as we can tell. It's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown.
A long time ago, during the pre-internet era, I worked in a local pizza place. I was only 17 at the time. It was a nice operation. The staff and management got along well. Try saying that with a straight face nowadays. One of our servers was a lovely young woman. We'll call her Brittany, who was very much a free spirit. She didn't own a car and would walk to work and would get rides home from other coworkers after her shift ended. She usually worked the late shift and closed up at around 10, usually leaving at about 11 after cleanup. I often gave her a ride home on the nights I didn't bike to work. She would sometimes even hitchhike home if no one could drive her. She was pretty fearless, but always kept pepper spray and a small knife in her purse, just in case. On one busy Friday night, we finished the post-shift cleanup at around midnight. We were the only two left at the very end aside from the owner, who was in the office counting the cash drawers and cataloging the sales receipts. Remember, this was before computers, so this had to be done with an adding machine and pencils. I rode my bicycle that day, as it was really nice outside for the first time in weeks. The owner said that she would give Brittany a ride if she waited until the accounting was done. It would be about another hour or so. She decided not to wait and said that she would just hitch a ride home. We both tried to discourage her from doing that, and I told her that she might not even get a lift in an hour anyways. But she just laughed and said, "Hey, I'm a nice-looking girl with great legs. Somebody's going to stop, and I have myself a defense kit." Honestly, I don't think her penknife would have even cut an apple, but it was something, and the pepper spray she used would at least be effective. I walked her outside, and we talked for a while in the parking lot. She joked about sitting on the handlebars of my bike and saying that I could bike her home. Of course, that wasn't an option. So we both laughed. I offered to stay with her until she got a ride. But she said no thanks, and that no one would stop if they saw her with a guy on a bicycle, and that it would have made them suspicious that we were up to something. So we said our goodbyes and headed off in separate directions. She didn't report to work on her next scheduled day, which was the following Monday. This was highly unusual. She was never late for work, or missed a shift without calling. A couple of days later, her mom came in, frantically asking if her daughter had been to work. She hadn't come home or called since Friday night. If she was coming home late or staying at some place, she would always call her mother. We were all freaked out a little bit. Her mother eventually reported her missing, and the police came around and questioned both me and the owner about that Friday night. The owner, being a middle-aged woman and me being a goofy 17-year-old kid, didn't interest them much as potential suspects or even persons of interest. After the police left, the teasing started. Restaurant workers can be a hard bunch, especially the kitchen staff, and most have a very dark sense of humor, at least the ones that I worked with. This went on for the next few shifts. and things didn't help when it became evident that I was the last person to ever see her alive. The cops came back into the pizza place and questioned me again, and also my parents, which of course freaked them out. Finally, about a week after she went missing, a coworker was really giving me hell about it, telling the waitresses not to get too close to me or they might disappear. I finally had enough of his underhanded remarks. After he sarcastically asked me where I hid the body, I snapped back. "At the bottom of the fucking lake. You want to join her?" Of course, everyone who overheard this went, "Ooh," and egged us both on. Being 17 and stupid, I said, "Yeah, I put her on the handlebars, rode out to the dam, and threw her off. Now shut the fuck up and leave me alone." That quieted everyone down. He ended up calling me a few names, and we eventually returned to our duties. Well, Brittany's body turned up in the reservoir. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. There was a reason her body wasn't discovered sooner, but I can no longer recall why. Needless to say, the cops got a whole lot more interested in me now, after that sarcastic tirade at the restaurant, where I unknowingly foretold almost the exact way her body was discovered. They had my parents bring me into the station, and I was questioned again, without an attorney present. Back then, unless an arrest was imminent, a juvenile could be questioned without one as long as a parent was there. As the dam was a good 20-mile drive from the restaurant, I was eliminated as a suspect. They made an arrest a short time after that. It was a man they had suspected in a similar incident the previous year. He confessed to both murders in exchange for a life sentence. Obviously, there was no connection between me and him, but I still felt awful. When I went to Brittany's memorial, I just sat in the back quietly. By that point, word had gotten around about my morbid joke that turned out to be true. I didn't attend the burial service. I didn't want to upset her family. A few years later, I got work at a gas station and had the misfortune of selling an arsonist the fuel he used to set his own house on fire. But that's a story for another time. One morning, when I was in elementary school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the mornings, this meant that I too had overslept. And now there was no way I would be ready in time to catch the bus. My school started at 8 a.m., and the bus pickup time was around 7 o'clock. But it was already 6:40, and I was still in my pajamas, and I hadn't even had breakfast yet. So my mom decided that today, she would just tell the bus driver to go ahead, and she would take me to school that day, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there in the dining room, eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's now around 6:50. We hear the bus pull up, about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus does not pull away. A short time later, we hear a knock at the door. My mom opens it and finds a man in a bus driver's uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular guy called in sick. He tells my mom he knows he's a few minutes early, explaining that he wanted an early start since he didn't know the route too well. My mom explains to him that she's going to take me to school herself since we had woke up late. The man gets visibly upset and says that he could wait for a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists and says that I won't be ready to go in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. I remember that the man seemed angry about this, but turned around, got back on the bus, and left. I returned to eating my breakfast, and I still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thought it was weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside, looking absolutely terrified, but doesn't say anything about it and just tells me to finish up and start getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up explaining a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found that it was being driven by the regular bus driver, and it was full of the other kids that are usually on my route. The other bus was empty, by the way. My mom asked the driver about the substitute and about him calling in sick. "I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route," he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go back inside and call the police to report this incident, which she did without me knowing. There was absolutely no one covering for my bus driver that day. Whoever it was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, or even if someone else had been abducted by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, if my mother hadn't overslept that day, I would have never made it to school or back home.
One evening when I was in my junior year of high school, my mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at a desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. When I was doing my homework, I put on my headphones and I listened to loud music. There was a big storm that night, and my desk was facing the window, so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents got back around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off the headphones. As soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout out my name. "What on earth happened in here?" she demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and I saw that the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. "I have no idea how those got there," I said. "I spent the whole night at my desk doing my homework." I watched as the look on her face changed from anger to confusion and then to fear. We both realized at the same time that someone else must have been in the house. We followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually left unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there was no trail of footprints leaving through the back door. All of a sudden, we hear something loud, a pounding noise that echoed throughout the house. Then the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slammed shut again. We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. She told them to come quickly as she shouted that someone's in our house. After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One officer stayed with us in the garage, while his partner went through the house, searching room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was no one in the house, and it was safe to go back in. As we were all breathing a high sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "It's mine," I told the officer. She asked us to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway, up the stairs, into my parents' bedroom, then towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at my door, which had been open the whole night. Scrawled on it in black marker was the following: 8:47, I see you. 8:53, you forgot to lock the back door. 8:59, you seem focused. 9:24, turn around. 9:47, look at me. 10:15, look at me. 10:37, look at me. 10:49, look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think what would have happened if I had just turned around.
This happened to me about 5 years ago, and even now, I get chills just thinking about it. I was renting a small house in a quiet neighborhood at the time. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cozy, affordable, and had a lot of character. The only thing I didn't love was the crawl space under the house. The access door to it was in the laundry room, a square wooden hatch flush with the door. It was locked from the outside, and I had never had any reason to open it, and I figured it was just pipes, cobwebs, and the usual creepy crawl space stuff. One evening, I came home late from work, and it had been a stressful day, and all I wanted was to shower and collapse into bed. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. My laundry room light was on. I was sure that I had turned it off that morning, but I chalked it up to being absent-minded in my rush to turn it off again. That night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a very faint noise, and at first I thought it was just the wind, but as I lay there, I realized that it was coming from the laundry room, a sort of soft, rhythmic thumping sound. My heart started to race, and I debated whether to get up and check it or just stay in bed and hope it stopped. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed my phone for light and tiptoed to the laundry room. When I opened the door, everything was quiet. But then I saw it. The hatch to the crawl space was slightly ajar, and my stomach dropped. I distinctly remembered it being locked, and there was no way that I could have accidentally opened it. Trying to stay calm, I convinced myself that it might be an animal that had somehow gotten in. I shut the hatch tightly and placed a heavy box of detergent on top of it before going back to bed. The next day, I called the landlord to ask if there were any pest issues I should know about, and he seemed surprised and said no one had reported anything like that before. Still, he promised to send someone over to check it out. That night, I double-checked the hatch and even put a chair on top of it for good measure. I didn't hear any noises, and I started to feel a little chilly for being so freaked out. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze. My bedroom door doesn't creak unless you push it slowly, and I knew I had closed it before bed. I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing, as I heard soft footsteps shuffle into the room. My phone was on the nightstand just out of reach, and the footsteps stopped right next to my bed. I could feel someone's presence, their quiet breathing in the dark. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swung it toward the intruder. There was the man, crouched on the floor, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked just as startled as I was. I screamed and bolted out of the room, running outside to the neighbor's house. I banged on their door until they let me in, and they called the police. When the officers arrived, they found the man still in my house, hiding in that crawl space. He had a small mattress, some food wrappers, and a collection of random items that he must have taken from my house. The lock on the hatch had been tampered with, and from the looks of it, he had been living under my house for at least a few days, maybe even longer. And the scariest part, the police said that they found a notebook with detailed notes about me. He had written down my daily routine, when I left for work, when I came home, even what I wore. And there were also a list of plans, though they wouldn't tell me what was on that. I moved out the next week and stayed with my friends until I found a new place. And to this day, I have no idea how he got in or how long he had been watching me before I noticed that something was wrong.
So this story takes place 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it's the single most mind-boggling thing I've ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I live in Iowa, and the winter's here. It's extremely cold at night, Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. Plus, the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing some video games. We were also the only ones at home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went straight from work to the bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers, so me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and just live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage door open and then slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh shit," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. Then I heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, "Anyone home?" I yell back upstairs, "Yeah, we're just hanging out in the basement, Mom." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door toward the stairs, and then she yells out again, "Hey, can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. "Yeah, just give me a minute, Mom." Then there was silence for another 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned and serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something just wasn't quite right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all my family and friends. Plus the voice, it was just wrong. It sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Weirded out, I replied back, "It's just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I finally found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up those steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something was not right. When I got to the top of the steps, it's black, pitch black. All the lights were off. There's no moon shining even through any of the windows. "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply. Silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full-on needles, and my adrenaline kicks in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong, dude?" Colton says. "My mom's not home." I reply as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her." I could see the confusion on his face. "Dude, there's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opened up into the yard. Then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't just leave them. I knew that if we left, something might happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused as hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off though. I'm gonna call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mother. She picks up immediately. "Hey sweetie, what's going on?" She answers. "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level. When I went up there, you weren't here," I said, hoping that she was playing some kind of joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay? What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got back. But before she did, you could hear something upstairs, not walking or sitting on things, but like a pressure in the air. Like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predator presence that had just flown away. We've still never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one of the many unexplainable things that's happened to us, but this is the easiest to write down, and the one I was happy to have a witness to. Unfortunately, my mother has passed away now, and I've moved away to Arizona. But whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what happened. I will truly never know what exactly happened, but I know that whatever that was had my mother's voice and it was evil and hungry. There's a special kind of magic in the silence after a snowstorm. As a kid, I felt like time itself froze, like the snow wasn't a weather event, but a gift from the universe, a reprieve from the grinding monotony of school and the endless rules of just being young. Snow days were rare enough to feel sacred, and when one would come, it turned everything electric. I remember the mornings best, snow casting a soft pearly light through the blinds, and the first delicious moment when the news would come. School was canceled. The air now felt cleaner on those days, the cold sharper in a way that woke you up more than any alarm clock ever could. I'd pull on my boots and my puffy coat, scarf wound tight enough to stifle my breath, and head out into the neighborhood before the rest of the world even had begun to stir. It was tradition, the first thing I did before snowball fights with friends, before sledding down a big hill at the park. Before I even touched the cocoa, my mom left me warming up on the stove. I'd shovel driveways. Not just my family's, mind you. Ours could wait. No, I'd hit the neighbors' places first, moving faster before anybody else got that same idea, or worse, decided to clear the snow themselves. There was this narrow window under a storm, maybe an hour or two, when fresh snow still sat pristine and untouched, and I'd learned to capitalize upon it. I'd knock on those same doors every year, a route ingrained in me as the back roads that I rode my bike on during the summer. Old Mrs. Hendricks across the street was always my first stop. She didn't trust snowblowers, said they messed up the natural lay of her yard. Next would be the Thompsons 3 houses down, who'd lived there since I was born and tipped better than anybody else on the block. Then the Petroviches, who always had their driveway packed down into ice by the time I got there because their kids were lazy and didn't want to shovel. And so on, house after house, until my arms burned and my fingers went numb, even when I had my gloves on. I make it sound endless, but it was honestly maybe 2 hours worth of work, at least for a breakneck kid like me. I mean, it wasn't all about the money, not really. Sure, I liked having a little cash to spend on some comic books or candy bars, but to me it was more than that. There was this rhythm to shoveling, the scrape of metal on concrete, the satisfying way the driveway transformed from a buried wasteland to a clean slate underneath my boots. And there was something about the quiet, working in that quiet, that I just loved. The stillness of the world muffled by snow. Even the sounds of cars were muted, as if the storm had pressed pause on reality itself. Most of the time, I was the only one out there. A few dog walkers, maybe, bundled up and shuffling along with red noses and puffs of white breath trailing after them. But otherwise, it felt like I had the entire block to myself, and the solitude never bothered me. If anything, it felt kind of cozy. I'd work for hours, moving from house to house until the snow was stacked in neat mounds along the edges of every driveway. I can still picture all those houses too. Every door, every window, every crack in the pavement as familiar to me as the lines of my own palms. I knew the ones to skip, the grumpy old men who'd bark at you to get off their property, or cheapskates who'd offer a handful of nickels for an hour's worth of labor. But most of my neighbors were kind, even the ones who didn't hire me. I could count even a few smiles, maybe a cookie or two for Mrs. Hendricks, and sometimes, even if the snow was bad enough, somebody would give me an extra $5 just for braving it out here. The snow had really piled high that winter, a heavy dense blanket that muffled the world and turned my neighborhood into a frozen postcard. I was 15 and used to the rhythm of those snow days, the gleeful anarchy of no school, the scramble to bundle up, and the steady grind of shoveling driveways to earn some new cash. It was honest work, the kind of thing that left your muscles aching and your wallet heavier by the end of the day. That year though, there was a new house to add to my circuit. At the end of the block stood the old Marshall place, a squat little rancher that had been empty for some odd years. Nobody really talked about why it sat so long with that for sale sign out front. It was just one of those places, the kind of house you walk past a little quicker without even knowing why. But a few months back, somebody finally moved in. This middle-aged reclusive man and a woman. At least that's what I heard, though I hadn't really seen much of them myself. They didn't come to the block parties or wave at the neighbors. If it hadn't been for the faint flicker of their television at night, you'd think the place was still abandoned. That morning, after clearing the other houses, I stood at the edge of their driveway. The snow was untouched. I hesitated, my breath hanging in the air like a question. A quick $20, I told myself. Maybe 30 if they tip well. Money was money, and if they weren't going to shovel it themselves, somebody had to. I knocked on the door, my knuckles echoing against that hollow wood. It took a long time for them to come answer, and I was about to turn around and leave when I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps, followed by the click of a deadbolt. The door creaked open just wide enough for me to see them. A man stood first, tall and pale, the kind of washed out look that made him seem like an old photograph left far too long out in the sun. His wife stepped into view a moment later, her face almost identical to his in its gauntness. They weren't twins, exactly, but there was something unnerving about how alike they were. Same sharp cheekbones, same sunken eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked. I explained about shoveling, rattling off my usual pitch about how much I charge and how quick I could get it done. They both stared at me for a beat too long, their expressions unreadable. Then the woman gave me a small nod, almost to herself. "All right," the man said. "Go ahead." The door then shut without another word, and I got to work. The snow was heavy, packed down with every step, and it took a lot longer than I expected to clear it, even half the driveway. About 20 minutes in, I saw the woman emerge from the house, bundled in a long coat and scarf. She walked down to her car, this old boxy sedan, and backed out slowly onto the street before driving on toward town. I watched her go, tires crunching on the snow, and felt this flicker of unease. Something about the way she moved, it was mechanical, robotic, and it set my nerves jangling, but I quickly shook it off. People are weird sometimes, it's not that big of a deal. I'd almost finished when the front door creaked open again. The man stepped out onto the porch. He was dressed for the weather now, in a thick coat and boots, but he didn't make any move to help, just stood there, watched me. "Almost done," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded but didn't reply. After a moment, he came down the steps and started pacing along the edge of the driveway. "You do this every year?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's a good way to make some money, and people around here know me, so..." I trailed off, realizing how stupid that sounded. He grunted, stopped walking, and turned to face me. "You charge 20? 25, I said quickly. I wasn't about to let him lowball me after all this effort. "I thought it was 20, he said again. "Your drive is much bigger than I thought, plus the snow is extra high over here." He nodded along. "No chance of 20? "Sorry," was all I said. He tilted his head like he was considering it, then just nodded again. "All right. You want to come inside when you're done, warm up with some hot chocolate?" My gut twisted. The way he said it, it wasn't friendly, it wasn't neighborly. It felt like a trap, like a spider offering tea to a fly. He hovered behind me, impossibly tall. Everything in my psyche was screaming at me to run. No thanks," keeping my voice as polite as I could. "I've got a few more driveways to do before it dumps again." He didn't push it, just shrugged and said he'd go get the money. He disappeared back into the house, and I tried to get my hands to quit shaking. I shoveled faster now, working double time to finish and just get out of there. Something about that man was just all wrong. The way he watched me like he was sizing me up, like I wasn't a kid with a shovel, but a problem he was trying to solve. I paused to wipe the sweat from my forehead, and that's when I saw him again. He was at the window now, the one in the living room. Curtains pulled back just enough to see his face. He was holding a camera now, the one with the long lens, and he was taking pictures of me. My stomach turned to ice. I dropped the shovel and took a step back, boots slipping on the packed snow. I watched the camera's flash pop twice. He didn't even care that I could see him, like he wanted me to know what he was doing. I turned towards the street, ready to leave now, but then I saw the car. The woman was back, her sedan crawling slowly up the road. She stopped at the base of the driveway, engine idling, and just sat there, staring at me through the windshield. She slowly pulled into the driveway, like she was savoring the approach. Tires crunched against the snow. I stood there awkwardly, shovel still in hand, unsure if I should just leave. But something told me to just stay. Maybe it was the way her gaze locked on me as she continued to park her car, unblinking. She stepped out, the cold air now seeming sharper with her presence, every breath visible like pale ribbons. She nodded at me, lips twitching into the thin, strange smile. "All finished?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat and tried again. "Yeah, I'm done. I just came to let you know." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes scanned the driveway. She was inspecting my work. She nodded again, satisfied, at least seeming to be, then tilted her head. "Did you go inside?" The question hit me like a slap to the face. "No," I said a little too quickly. "No, I didn't. Why would I go inside?" "That's a shame," she said. "You would have had so much fun." The words turned my stomach. There was definitely something weird here, something going on. I took a step back without realizing it, and my boots slid a little bit on the packed snow. Before I could say anything else, the front door creaked open. The man stepped out, but now holding a neat stack of bills in his gloved hand. He didn't say anything as he walked toward me, each step deliberate, crunching through that snow. "Here," he said, holding out the money. I reached for it, but he didn't let it go right away. Instead, he started counting the bills aloud, one at a time, his voice slow and deliberate. 1, 2, 3. He was paying me in $1 bills. By the time he hit 25, I was ready to bolt, but he didn't release the cash. Instead, he leaned in slightly, eyes boring into mine. "Are you sure you don't want to come inside?" he asked again, voice colder now. "No," I said, almost ready to scream. "I've got to go." The change in his demeanor was instant, like a switch flipping. His face then turned into a snarl, and he yelled, "Then get off my property, now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I stuffed the money in my pocket and sprinted down the driveway. I did not look back, even when I thought I heard the woman laughing, not even when I felt the weight of their stares pressing on my back. When I finally reached my house, I locked the door behind me and vowed never to set foot near that place again. Never waved, never offered to shovel again, just avoided that place like a plague. Once when I was in college, I lost the key to my car, and I didn't have a spare. It was the middle of winter. I didn't have a choice but to walk to a car dealership 6 or 7 miles from my apartment to get a replacement. In hindsight, this seems like such a weird, desperate avenue to take, literally. I think I used the wintertime as an excuse not to ask for a ride, but damn, it was also the best excuse for a ride. Walking in the snow sucks, but I was young, and 7 miles didn't sound that far. Let me tell you how wrong I was. This was the most exhausting thing I've ever done. The first mile took my breath away, but after that, each step took noticeably more effort. My energy levels weren't that great to start with, having the stress of no car or key, so I was handicapped from the get-go. The other mistake that I made was not realizing there would be another 7 miles waiting for me on the return trip. This really was desperation, not planning out any part of the journey before me. I got there just fine in the early afternoon, but it took a lot longer than I thought to get in a replacement key. The quote they gave me over the phone was way shorter than what they told me in the waiting room. An hour turned into 2, and then I didn't hear back from anybody. The sun set. Snow started to fall. Finally, someone came out with an envelope with my name on it, 2 keys, ready for my car. I just needed to navigate the snowy roadways in the dark. I pulled up my flimsy hood up against the wind and snow, but it was completely useless. The gusts cut right through it, and my whole face was frozen numb within the first 10 minutes. My phone said it dropped from 19 degrees to negative 25 degrees. This accounted for the wind chill, which had frozen my scarf stiff. I could feel my lips blistering from the temperatures. Another factor presented itself. I forgot my inhaler. It was in my school bag. I started being careful all the way back not to breathe too deeply. My breathing was just about the only thing I had control over, so I actually had to slow down my pace even more just to accommodate my lungs. It was like a death trap for a person like me, having to move slower and slower in plummeting temperatures. I started hearing this strange, tiny clicking noise and realized that the condensation from my breath had settled on my eyelashes and the wind had frozen them, making them clink every time I blinked. I laughed at first, but after hearing it enough, I started to panic. Would my eyelashes break off by the time I got home? Would the frost extend into liquid in my eyeballs and start to freeze them too? I'm getting colder and colder and exerting more and more just to keep going. Eventually, the inevitable asthma attack starts, about 3 blocks from my apartment. It starts as this biting fire, and soon, my lungs are empty and shriveled. It's like someone just hit me in the back with a sledgehammer and knocked the wind completely out of me. Now I'm trying to recover through a straw. It's a panic feeling, and I can't afford to fall into this attack anymore. Somehow, I managed to stagger the rest of the way through. I kept losing track of whether my feet were moving or not. Sometimes I thought I was just standing in place, but when I looked down, I'd be in motion. It was a very weird hallucination. When I finally made it, I knew all I had to do was to get to my inhaler. I knew exactly where it was, I just had to get to it. I climbed the stairs. I opened the door. I collapsed on the couch where I left my bag. Numb fingers fumbled it out, but I only managed one of the required 2 puffs before the oxygen deprivation rendered me unconscious. I'd never passed out before. The involuntary nature of the experience was sickening. My roommates thought I was napping and covered me with a blanket, boots and all. I regained consciousness in the wee hours, weak and wheezing. As I regained coherency, I remembered what had happened. I broke down and sobbed quietly as I could. I could feel the chill in the space between my organs. I was scared to pull my boots off and see what my feet looked like. The 1 puff had been enough to open my airway a little bit. I used my inhaler again, and though I probably should have gone to the hospital, I just put on a few layers and had a cup of mint tea and then went to bed. My body seemed to be fine, aside from the absolute destroyed muscles in my legs and my chest. There was a throb in my head too, but not enough to get me out of the house again. And then I remembered the keys in the envelope, the whole goal of my mission, my trek through the tundra. In a panic, checked the interior pocket. There they were, safe and sound. All was right in Winter Wonderland. My roommates were flabbergasted when I told them what had happened the next day. They really thought that I was just deeply asleep. I was very lucky to not have died. So obviously, next time, I'm asking for a ride.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.